Ivy, will you be my wife? Lucas went down on one knee, his voice soft but full of emotion as he looked up at her, his eyes searching for the answer he had longed to hear. The wind carried the scent of the ocean as waves gently lapping at the shore, the golden hues of the setting sun casting a warm glow over the scene. It was a moment of pure magicone that felt surreal and yet completely real. A woman who had been a stranger to luxury, a woman he had found on the street years ago, now stood before him. She had transformed over time, her past buried in the sand beneath their feet, her heart carved into the promise they had built together. Ivy blinked back, the tears threatening to fall. How had they come to this? It had started with a mere 10 million contract, an opportunity she thought she could never have, and now here they were. The love between them, once so unlikely, had blossomed into something beautiful, something she never could have imagined. She glanced down at the dazzling diamond ring he had slipped onto her finger, its sparkle catching the last rays of the sun. The decorations around them were elegant twinkling lights in soft white flowing fabric that danced in the wind, and a scattering of flowers that seemed to bloom just for this moment. "Yes, I will marry you, Lucas," Ivy whispered, her voice breaking slightly as the emotions flooded her. She took his outstretched hand and pulled him up into a warm embrace. The waves crashed against the shore, the wind whispered through the trees, and in that moment, time seemed to stand still as Lucas held her close, their future unfolding before them. For all these years, Halida, Lucas's ex-fiancée, had found it impossible to move on from the humiliation she endured on the day of her wedding. That day, which should have been a celebration of love, had instead become a moment of deep public disgrace. Every time she and her husband had the smallest misunderstanding, he would remind her of how she had disgraced them in front of everyone. The bitterness of that event had seeped into every crack of her marriage, poisoning it with resentment and regret. She would lie awake at night, replaying the scene over and over in her mind, the look of Lucas as he turned his back on her in front of their friends, the way his eyes flickered with pity and rejection. How could she ever recover from that? How could she face the world again after Lucas had done what he did? But despite her anger toward him, Halida never truly acknowledged the part she had played in the downfall of their relationship. She had been the one to invite him, to make him feel small, to try and prove to him, to herself, that she was the one who would come out on top. In doing so, she had made a fool of herself. And now, years later, every fragment of bitterness from that time haunted her. The anger still burned inside her, a constant reminder of the wound Lucas had left in her heart. But it wasn't just about the past, it was about what she couldn't have now. She couldn't stand the thought of Lucas finding happiness with someone else, especially not with the woman who had so easily replaced her, who had stood where she had once stood. That woman, Ivy, had put Halida in her place, and that hurt more than any rejection ever could. In the darkness of her marriage, where her own husband barely acknowledged her, Halida found herself drawn to the one thing that still seemed to matter, Lucas. She stalked his every move, following his life from the shadows, unable to let go of the need to know what he was doing, who he was with. She was trapped in her own cycle of bitterness, determined to watch him suffer the way she had suffered. She couldn't let him move on, couldn't let him be happy. Her husband, a man who had long since stopped trying to understand her, had made it clear how much of a fool she had been in Lucas's life. Her husband is exactly acting like her when she still had Lucas loving her. He was a chronic womanizer, a man incapable of change, someone who didn't care about his own family. Halida had pushed Lucas away, and now she was left to deal with the consequences of her own decisions. Her resentment grew with each passing day, and it fueled her obsession with his engagement to Ivy. She couldn't allow it. Not after everything. Not after what had happened to her. She would do anything to stop them. Anything to see Lucas hurt the way she had been. The bitterness in her heart had taken root, and now it was the only thing she had left to hold on to. Halida's obsession with Ivy grew stronger every day. She couldn't let go of the fact that the woman who had replaced her in Lucas's life seemed to have it all, the charm, the elegance, the perfect life. It infuriated Halida, so she did what she did best. She started digging, investigating, trying to uncover every little detail about Ivy's past. She couldn't fathom how someone like Ivy had managed to win Lucas's heart, especially after the public humiliation she had faced years ago. But as she dug deeper into Ivy's life, Something completely unexpected turned up something that threw her off balance. Ivy wasn't the high-class, privileged woman Halida had assumed her to be. No, far from it. Ivy had once been homeless. A homeless woman? Halida muttered to herself, a bitter chuckle escaping her lips as she leaned back in her chair, absorbing the shock. The woman who had stood before her in a beautiful gown, who had stolen Lucas's attention, was once living on the streets. It didn't make sense. How could someone like her have humiliated Halida on her wedding day? How could Lucas have let her in after everything they had been through? The realization twisted inside her, like a blade being turned in an open wound. How had she, Halida, the one with wealth and privilege, been outshined by a homeless woman? The irony stung, and a new sense of anger began to boil beneath her skin. She could hardly believe what she had uncovered. But the more she thought about it, the clearer it became. Ivy wasn't the woman Halida had once imagined. She was far from the perfect lady Halida had assumed. This discovery ignited something darker within Halida. She could feel her emotions shifting, taking a dangerous turn. This wasn't just about the humiliation anymore. It wasn't about the fact that Ivy had stolen Lucas from her. No, now it was personal. Halida had been brought low by a woman who had once been nothing. A woman who had risen from the streets and into the life Halida thought was hers by right. "I won't let her have this," Halida whispered to herself, her eyes narrowing with cold determination. The their wedding was fast approaching, and Halida's mind was racing. She couldn't wait. She would be there, front and center, and she would make sure that Ivy knew exactly who she was. She would ruin it all. The bitterness that had been festering inside her for so long had finally found a way to escape, and nothing was going to stop her. The thought of the wedding day filled her with both rage and anticipation. She would take her revenge on Ivy, and this time, nothing would be left to chance. She would make sure that Ivy, the homeless woman who had humiliated her so completely, would feel the weight of her wrath. Halida couldn't wait any longer. The idea of watching Ivy's life crumble beneath her again was too tempting to resist. She knew where Ivy liked to shop high-end boutiques that spoke of success, wealth, and sophistication. Halida had tracked her movements for weeks, studying the places she frequented, the stores she entered. Today, she would make her move. She stepped into the sleek, polished shopping mall with purpose, her eyes scanning the crowd. Her heart raced with anticipation, a smile curling on her lips as she thought of the humiliation she was about to inflict on Ivy. She could already picture either walking into the boutique, making a scene, calling attention to Ivy's past. The homeless woman, the one who had dared to outshine her, would be put in her place once and for all. Halida spotted Ivy near a high-end clothing store, flipping through a rack of dresses. Her heart skipped a beat. The woman before her was beautiful, groomed, elegant, and poised, but it was the same woman who had once been nothing, wasn't it? She took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. This was it. She walked toward Ivy with a confident stride, her eyes burning with a quiet fury. She was ready to make her mark, ready to show the world who Ivy really was. But as Halida drew closer, something strange happened, something she hadn't prepared for. Ivy turned, her eyes meeting Halida's, and for a moment the air between them seemed to still. Ivy wasn't the same woman Halida remembered. Gone was the frail, vulnerable figure she had once been, the one who had once lived on the streets. The woman before her now radiated strength, self-assurance, and a quiet confidence that seemed to fill the space around her. Her posture was straight, her expression calm, but her eyes, they held a depth of experience that Halida could never have imagined. Ivy's outfit was stunning, tailored, sophisticated, and perfectly fitting. It wasn't the old, worn-out clothes she once wore. This was the result of years of hard work, of overcoming the hardships life had thrown her way. Ivy's hair was styled to perfection, and her makeup, subtle yet striking, only added to her newfound aura. She didn't look like someone who had struggled. She didn't look like the woman Halida had once seen in tatters begging for help. The realization hit Halida hard, and her confidence faltered for just a moment. This was not the woman she had prepared to face. Ivy wasn't a victim anymore. She wasn't a homeless woman who needed saving. She had built herself up, piece by piece, and now she was standing before Halida as a force to be reckoned with. Ivy's gaze remained steady as she took in Halida's presence. There was no fear in her eyes, no sign of the vulnerable woman Halida had once known. Instead, there was a quiet understanding, as if Ivy knew exactly what was going on inside Halida's mind. Halida felt a flicker of doubt, but she quickly pushed it aside. She wasn't about to let Ivy see her weakness. "So, you're still here, huh?" Halida sneered, trying to regain control of the situation. She wanted to be the one to dominate this encounter, to make Ivy feel small. Ivy didn't flinch. She simply smiled softly, but with a quiet power that made Halida's stomach twist. "I'm here because I built myself up from nothing. I made my own way, and I'm proud of it. If you're here to dig up old wounds, Halida, I think you've come to the wrong place." Halida froze. The words hit her harder than she expected. The woman before her wasn't angry, wasn't desperate for validation, she was unbothered. There was a sense of peace about Ivy that Halida couldn't understand. It was as if all her attempts at humiliation had no effect, as if Ivy had long since outgrown the need for validation from anyone, least of all Halida. Ivy's smile didn't waver. "I won't be part of your madness anymore. I'm not that girl, Halida. Move on. Maybe it's time you do so." The words stung more than Halida cared to admit. They weren't just a reminder of Ivy's growth. They were a challenge that Halida wasn't ready for. For a moment, the two women stood in silence, the weight of their shared history hanging between them. Halida could feel her anger bubbling up again, but now there was a sense of futility in it. She wasn't going to get the reaction she had hoped for. Ivy wasn't going to crumble before her. Ivy turned, preparing to walk away, but not before one last look. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Halida. But trust me, holding on to bitterness won't help you." Halida watched as Ivy disappeared into the crowd, a small part of her feeling like she had lost something, even though she couldn't quite pinpoint what it was. She stood there for a long while, the words echoing in her mind. She had come to destroy Ivy, but instead, she had only witnessed the quiet power of a woman who had learned to rise from the ashes. And for the first time in years, Halida found herself questioning everything. As Halida stepped into the quiet of her home, the door clicking shut behind her, she felt a heaviness settle in her chest. She walked slowly to the couch and sank down, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. The confrontation with Ivy had shaken her more than she had expected. She had gone into it with such certainty, certain that Ivy's past would somehow diminish her, that her own past victories would make her the victor in the end. But instead, Ivy had shown her strength, her growth, and Halida couldn't shake the feeling that she was the one who had lost. She leaned back, staring at the ceiling, the cool evening air seeping through the window, carrying with it the smell of fresh rain. It was as if the world outside had been cleansed, while inside her there was nothing but a storm of regret. Lucas. The name echoed in her mind like a bitter reminder of what she had thrown away. For years, Lucas had loved her with everything he had. He had been kind, patient, and loyal, always willing to forgive her mistakes, always willing to put her first. But she had taken it all for granted. She had played with his emotions, pretending that his love wasn't enough, that she deserved more. And in the end, she had cheated on him, betrayed him in the most painful way. Now, as she sat there in the dim light of her living room, the silence pressing in around her, Halida felt the weight of her own mistakes. She had once had a man who loved her deeply, who saw her for more than just her beauty and wealth. But she had ruined it, chasing after fleeting desires, thinking she could have everything without consequence. And now, she couldn't even find a man who could stand her excess. The men she had been with were never quite enough, never quite able to handle her bitterness, her need for control, and her insecurities. But it wasn't just her failed relationships that tormented her, it was her marriage. Halida had thought, for a time, that she had found security in her husband, but now, all she felt was the constant sting of his mistreatment. He ignored her, belittled her, and yet, she had no strength left to fight back. She was trapped in a cycle of indifference and resentment, where every day felt like a reminder of how far she had fallen. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she quickly wiped them away, not wanting to admit to herself just how much she had lost. Regret settled in like a thick fog. She regretted every cruel word she had said to Lucas, every selfish decision that had led her to this point. She regretted turning away from the love that had been offered to her so freely, only to be left with nothing but the cold, empty walls of her own making. But no matter how much she wished it, no one could turn back the hands of time. The past was a heavy weight on her shoulders, one that she couldn't shake. And as she sat there, alone with her thoughts, she realized that she had been her own worst enemy all along. She had chased after something she thought would make her happy success, status, and control, but in the process, she had lost everything that truly mattered. Halida sat in the darkness for a long time, the regret gnawing at her heart. She had been given the chance to love, to be loved, and she had squandered it. Now she could only sit with the consequences, wondering if she would ever be able to find a way out of the mess she had created. The days that followed felt like an eternity to Halida. The weight of her actions, the unbearable guilt that seemed to consume her every waking moment, was something she couldn't ignore any longer. Her house felt empty, just like the hollow space in her heart. She had been living with the consequences of her past for far too long, and the one thing that still echoed in her mind was Lucas and the love they once had. She couldn't stay in this self-inflicted prison. Something in her broke that day in the shopping mall, watching Ivy walk away with such poise, strength, and grace. It reminded her of the life she had once had with Lucas, a life that she had carelessly thrown away. It was time to make things right, to face the man who had once given her everything, even when she didn't deserve it. Determined, Halida made up her mind. She drove to Lucas's mansion, her heart pounding with each passing mile. She wasn't sure if he would even allow her inside, or if he would even want to hear her apologies. But she had to try. She had to at least own up to the person she had been. When she arrived at the grand estate, the familiar sight of the large gates and elegant exterior only served to deepen the sense of shame she felt. She parked her car, took a deep breath, and walked to the front door. Before she could knock, the door swung open, and there stood Lucas dressed in a sharp suit, his expression unreadable. "Halida?" His voice was soft, yet there was something in his eyes that told her he wasn't sure whether to welcome her or turn her away. I came to apologize," Halida began, her voice shaking. "For everything I did, for all the hurt I caused you. I don't expect forgiveness, but I need you to know how deeply sorry I am for how I treated you. You deserved so much more than I gave you." Lucas studied her for a moment, his face still, but something flickered in his eyes. He stepped aside, motioning for her to come in. "I never thought I'd hear you say that," he said quietly. "But it's a little too late for apologies, Halida. I've moved on." Halida nodded, the pain of his words cutting through her. She had known this day would come. It didn't make it easier to hear, but she deserved it. "I understand. I just needed to say it," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Just then, Ivy walked into the room, her radiant smile lighting up the space. She had clearly just finished some last-minute preparations. She glanced at Halida with a sense of calm recognition but didn't speak right away. "Lucas, are you ready?" Ivy asked, her voice soft and warm yet full of purpose. She had every right to look so composed, Halida thought. She had earned her place by Lucas's side. Lucas nodded, walking over to Ivy and taking her hand. "Almost. We're just waiting for the final touches." Halida stood silently, her heart heavy, watching the couple before her. There was a quiet tenderness between them, a bond that Halida knew she could never break. She had no place here anymore. She had lost Lucas, lost herself, and now she had to accept it. "I wish you both happiness," Halida whispered, her voice cracking slightly. "I know I can't undo what I've done, but I hope you find everything you deserve." Ivy smiled warmly, a kindness in her eyes that Halida wasn't used to. "Thank you," Ivy said gently. "I know you've been through a lot, but it's time to move forward. We all have our own paths." With that, Halida turned and walked out of the mansion, her steps slow and heavy, but strangely lighter than they had been in years. It was the first time she had truly faced her past and admitted her mistakes. The door closed behind her with a soft click, and for the first time, she didn't feel like she was running away from something. She was letting go. The grand wedding of Lucas and Ivy was nothing short of magical. The ceremony was held at a luxurious beachfront venue, the sun setting on the horizon, casting golden light over the couple as they exchanged vows. Ivy looked breathtaking in her white gown, the soft breeze from the ocean dancing through her hair, and Lucas stood proudly beside her, a gentle smile on his face. The guests gathered around, witnessing the union of two people who had fought their own battles to find each other. Their love, once marred by past betrayals, now stood as a testament to redemption and resilience. As Lucas placed the ring on Ivy's finger, Halida, from a distance, watched the moment unfold with a quiet sense of peace, knowing that their love was real and strong. Lucas had moved on. Ivy had found her place in his heart, and Halida, though broken, had begun to heal. The music played, the laughter and joy filled the air, and Halida, watching from afar, finally understood that some things were simply meant to be. She had lost Lucas, but she had gained the clarity to let go. And in that, there was a strange kind of freedom. The wedding was more than just the union of two souls. It was a celebration of second chances, of love that had triumphed over pain. And for Halida, as she walked away, there was hope that maybe, just maybe, her own journey to healing had just begun.